Dan Siskind is a trustee with Psychosis Australia, and he is chair of our Research Advisory Committee, a national research committee. Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I'm Dan, I'm a psychiatrist from Queensland, and most of my life I've had to come on to talks following Jackie Curtis. And can I tell you, that's bloody hard. And so I looked at the agenda and thought, I'm not coming after Jackie today. Barry, that was an incredibly powerful story, and something which is really, I think, hopefully can shape our hearts and shape the journeys that we take today. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about your amazing career ahead of you throughout the day. All right, so one of the joys of being the chair of the Research Advisory Committee is when you get called on to do a talk, you say, Dan, this is how much time that's left for you to speak, so I'm going to keep this really brief and move through it quickly. So what I'm going to talk about is some amazing work that one of my PhD candidates, this amazing psychiatry trainee, Sean Halstead, has been doing around multimorbidity. So this kind of fits in a little bit with what Barry's story about the broader health of the whole human, the whole person that I serve as a psychiatrist. Because we know that people who have severe mental illness are more likely to have poor physical health. And we're going to talk a bit about that interaction and how to conceptualize it. But why does it matter is because the consumers that I serve, the consumers that we serve, die 10 to 20 years younger than the general population. And although suicide is a part of that, that's not the majority of it. The majority of it is from avertible cardiometabolic disease. Severe mental illness is one of the leading causes of disability that's potentiated by some of the physical health multimorbidity associated with that. And this leads to coming to what Sophie had talked about earlier, the significant health economic expenditure and this real need to come up with policy initiatives to help overcome it on a systems level. So if we think about a human with schizophrenia, they might have schizophrenia and diabetes, they might have schizophrenia and heart disease, they might have schizophrenia and kidney disease. And if we think about those dichotomously as comorbidity, we perhaps don't tell the full story. But when we think about it as multimorbidity, this is a person who might have schizophrenia, who might have some genetic loading for glucose dysregulation, who might be on an antipsychotic, such as olanzapine, which is a terrible antipsychotic for causing glucose dysregulation. They might have some amotivation. They might have some poor levels of physical activity. They develop diabetes. That diabetes is associated then with heart disease, and the diabetes is then associated with kidney disease. And we have this interactive system of multimorbidity, which is causing these harms. So multimorbidity is this coexistence of two or more chronic health conditions in an individual, as opposed to this comorbidity, which is one additional health condition in reference to the index condition. So if we think about this person with schizophrenia, type 2 diabetes, a substance use disorder, and congestive heart failure and COPD, we can think about these as being physical multimorbidities. So this person has type 2 diabetes, congestive heart failure and COPD, but they also have the psychiatric comorbidity. It's not multimorbidity of having schizophrenia, and in this instance, a substance abuse disorder. And you look at them in terms of clusters of conditions, they're pretty similar between people with severe mental illness and the general population. This is a study which looked at kind of clusters of different conditions coded in different colors here. Broadly the same, however, they're going to develop at a much younger age. So if we think about person red and person blue, and so if we look at these persons at age 60, both of them have multimorbidity. But if we think about that journey towards it, perhaps person red, they developed schizophrenia around the age of 20, went on to develop some obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms at the age of 25, 30, developed diabetes at the age of 30, they were maybe a smoker, developed COPD. So they developed psychiatric multimorbidity at the age of 30, this physical multimorbidity at the age of 40, and they've lived with that for a longer duration. Whereas person blue, maybe someone who's developed depression at age 40, and diabetes at age 50, and then at 60, some COPD and osteoporosis. So they're developing their physical and psychiatric multimorbidity much later on in life. So these people that we're serving with severe mental illness are living with this physical and psychiatric multimorbidity earlier and for longer. And so if we think about how we conceptualize this, there's these modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. And so I'm an adult psychiatrist. I'm not a youth psychiatrist. So when I think of modifiable, I think of something which is modifiable after age 25. I know Jackie might chip me about some of the things I'm going to put in the non-modifiable risk factors, but the world starts at 25 in my clinic. So we've got these genetic risk factors, prenatal exposures, early childhood development, childhood maltreatment, and social determinants during development. But then by the time I'm starting my work, and again, granted, I'm an adult psychiatrist, there's these modifiable risk factors such as health risk behaviours, looking at diet, looking at physical activity, looking at managing substance abuse, health systems factors such as access to healthcare, and then prescriber-based factors, what sort of psychiatric medications we're choosing and how we're balancing the adverse events associated with those. Because these multimorbidity leads to these 3 Ds of premature mortality. The deaths are due to medical causes, majority of them. This physical illness increases the risks of mortality. And these medical conditions causing mortality are more likely to be underdiagnosed. We've got this idea of diagnostic overshadowing. So when a person with severe mental illness comes to a primary care clinic to talk about their diabetes or their heart disease, but they're thought disordered, it's really hard for the doctor in those 10-minute appointments to look beyond the presentation of thought disorder to deal with the other conditions there. It worsens functional status. There's this earlier onset of frailty, which is a concept for another day. And then these health economic burdens of extra conditions and extra cost, exacerbating polypharmacy and unemployment and social costs. So how do we count this? So I'll race through this a little bit. We did this systematic review looking at all the studies looking at multimorbidity among people with severe mental illness. We've included sort of 82 studies, including 1.6 million people with severe mental illness and 13 million people with controls, to try and look at the rates of multimorbidity between people with severe mental illness and the general population. And so you are 2.5 times as likely to have multimorbidity if you're living with severe mental illness. All right, so that's a huge increase, 2.5 times. But what's more troubling is when we broke down the average age of these populations we called young people under 40. Again, bear in mind I'm an adult psychiatrist, Jackie. But looking at people who are under 40 and people who are over 40. If you were under 40, you were 4 times as likely to have multimorbidity than the general population. So it's really striking our consumers young and living with it, and they're living with it, for the remainders of their lives. 25% of people with severe mental illness had physical multimorbidity. 14% of people with severe mental illness had psychiatric multimorbidity. So really high rates of additional diagnoses. All right, so let's summarize this because I am tight on time here. Multimorbidity, it's a common. It's over twice the odds of physical multimorbidity compared to those without mental illness. 1 in 4 have physical multimorbidity, 1 in 7 have psychiatric morbidity, and it's much worse for people who are younger. So how do we manage this? How do we make meaning of this? How do we come to strategies to address it? And so this way of managing multimorbidity, it's my last slide, kind of comes back to some of the issues that Sophie had challenged us with before. How do we come up with levers? How do we come up with strategies to do this? Because currently we use this kind of single disease approach. So consumer read before, who's got schizophrenia, COPD, diabetes and OCD, might go see their GP, and their GP will send out multiple referrals. So they'll come and see me as a psychiatrist, and I'll go, look, I don't really care about the diabetes or the COPD. Here, take this horribly obesogenic medication and go talk to some of these other people about it. They might see the respiratory physician who sees the COPD and then just treats that in isolation. They might go see the endocrinologist who's treating the diabetes but having to overcome all of the other lifestyle and medication factors which are worsening that. And so you've got the consumer who might also be living with cognitive impacts of their mental illness, trying to collate all of this information. So they're on more medications from every single person, getting this fragmented and non-cohesive plan. But if we think about this in a multimorbidity approach, we've got the consumer who's going to see a multidisciplinary team, where we're sitting down together. so that we're actually coming up with a plan with the consumer for all of the issues they're facing. And then we can do medication rationalization. We can look at removing medications rather than adding additional ones. We can look at lifestyle interventions around diet and exercise as part of that management plan. And we've got this shared treatment decision with the consumer, so they're an active part of this cohesive conversation. And I thought, Sophie, when you were talking about this, what levers do we have? We don't have any financial incentive to have a conversation together. And so, you know, in order for that to happen, you'd have to have all the physicians and the psychiatrists and the patient all in the one room together so we could all build Medicare at the same time, because there isn't really a funding model for comprehensive care. So once we have that, then we can start to shift things towards this multi-morbidity model. So that's my story for this. I'm happy to chat to you guys in the breaks, but I think we need to move on to more important things, which are morning tea. Thank you so much.